of the city manager for approval.
Okay, we have one item on the consent agenda. Does anybody wish for it to be pulled for separate consideration? Hearing none, Madam City Clerk, will you please call the roll? Oh, I'm sorry, we need a motion for approval of the consent agenda?
I'd move to approve the consent agenda.
I'm sorry, I apologize. I needed a second.
Then I'll second it.
Yeah, thank you. Madam City Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilmembers Huff,
Yes.
Perkins.
Yes.
Stewart.
Yes.
Lucy.
yes,
Steinmeier.
Yes.
Hobart.
Yes.
Mayor Ware.
Yes. Madam City Clerk.
Bill number 20-508, an ordinance authorizing acceptance of Round 1 and Round 2 of Show Me Strong DMO program grant funds through the State of Missouri Division of Tourism in the amount of $1,055,998, awarding a contract with the Madden Media, the city's tourism marketing agency of record for program grant administration and implementation, authorizing future change orders for additional funding and/or time extensions, and making the necessary appropriations and declaring an emergency. Bill number 20-508, an ordinance authorizing acceptance of Round 1 and Round 2 of Show Me Strong DMO program grant funds through the State of Missouri Division of Tourism in the amount of $1,055,998, awarding a contract with the Madden Media, the city's tourism marketing agency of record for program grant administration and implementation, authorizing future change orders for additional funding and/or time extensions, and making the necessary appropriations and declaring an emergency. Second and final reading.
Thank you very much. Mr. City Manager, would you like to offer some explanation on this item?
We would be pleased to. Through the various federal actions that have been taken in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, funds were made available across the country to really help promote tourism activity. That has been one of the industry's hardest hit. Obviously, people have great many valid concerns about being out, moving about, et cetera, with this virus. So dollars were made available to help with marketing and attraction efforts to try to bolster the lost revenue that's come about as a result of that. Our organization in Round 1 competed for funding in that, and we were awarded about $55,000, which is certainly very much appreciated, and we were pleased to receive that. However, as home to the only presidential home in the state and the only presidential library in the state, we certainly felt like, and I should mention as well a number of other historic sites related to the Three Trails story, et cetera, we felt like we would certainly benefit and have a lot to share with the state's overall desire to bolster and improve tourism activity. So a second round of competition was held. Statewide pot of about $2 million was made available. Our team rallied together very quickly with support from a number of those great institutions like the Truman Library, put forward an application, and pleased to report of the $2 million that was made available in Round 2, our organization was awarded $1 million, so 50% of the overall statewide pot that was made available. These funds, again, are to be utilized to help promote and market tourism activity. Certainly, we believe our assets, and I think this validates it, play a key role in the state's overall tourism economy and tourism activity. We have representatives from our tourism department here tonight, as well as the firm who will be helping us with those marketing activities, Madden. So if the council has any questions about those activities specifically, we'd be very excited to share that, but that is a general overview of what this ordinance seeks to do.
Okay, thank you. Are there any comments or questions from the council? Okay. Hearing none, Madam City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmembers Huff,
Yes.
Perkins,
Yes.
Stewart,
Yes.
DeLucy,
yes,
Steinmeier,
Yes.
Hobart,
Yes.
Mayor Ware.
Yes. Ordinance passes. This meeting is adjourned, and I will call to order the council study session for September 14th, 2020. Our first presentation is Reuben Brown presenting a draft report for the agreed upon procedures of Crackernet TIF District. Mr. City Manager.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, several months ago, a resolution was introduced by Councilmember Huff, but adopted by the full council, that asked us to go look at one of our largest economic development projects in the city, that being the Falls at Crackerneck Creek Tax Increment Financing Project. The purpose of that, certainly as the council is well aware, is we were beginning to look at how we manage that financial obligation. That involved beginning to assess opportunities to refinance that debt out there. And the idea here was really to look at, are we turning over every rock? Are we making sure that all of our payments are being done properly and appropriately, and that this economic development project is functioning as it was intended to do so. So with the council's direction from that ordinance, we enlisted our third-party audit firm to help us do a review of that TIF project. They have completed that review, and as that was a directive of the council, we wanted to come back and present those findings to you tonight. So I know our Finance and Administration Director, Brian Kidney's here, but in the interest of time, I may go ahead and just ask our audit firm, Chester Moyer, to go ahead and introduce this topic, and then I think Chester has his colleague on the call as well, and can go ahead and review the audit findings with you. So Chester, if it'd be okay, I'll just go ahead and ask you to make any introductory comments and get right to it.
Yes, thank you, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. It's great to be before you again. We are your external auditors, and my name is Chester Moyer. Garrett Meyer, my colleague that's with me, is in our consulting group, and we do conduct your external audit, independent external audit for the city. Last year was our first year doing that for the city, and we're going to be starting our year in field work here very shortly for this year's audit. But what we did here is different than an audit. An agreed upon procedures report doesn't involve the concept of materiality like an audit would. So if we have something to report, there's no concept of materiality. Whatever we see, we just say what we saw. The other thing that's different about an agreed upon procedures report from an audit that's meaningful is that we, as the accounting firm, we don't design the procedures of the agreed upon procedures report. Those are designed by others, and in this case it was done really by the city's initiative of what they wanted us to look at. So as a result of that, we looked at a lot of information covering periods that we wouldn't have normally looked at in an audit. So this report covers the period January 1st, 2013 through December 31st, 2014, and January 1st, 2017 through December 31st, 2018. So those were periods of transition within the finance group at the city, and were periods that the city asked us to look at specifically. So Garrett, one of our consultants on the engagement, he'll go through very briefly each of the 10 areas that we looked at to report the results of what we've done.
All right, thank you, Chester. So, as Chester said, I will plan to go through the report here and with you on screen. So we list out each procedure and our related findings. So I will briefly go over that for you. You'll see a consistent theme here in our procedures is that generally we recalculated the revenue. And in order to do that, we looked at the agreements. We determined, okay, how much revenue is supposed to go into TIF, how is it allocated, what's the formula. Using that information, we recalculated it and compared it to management supporting documentation and the general ledger to make sure it was recorded appropriately. So we did that for procedure one. It's the annual pilot revenue. Like we did each of those procedures that I just went through at a high level, and we found no exceptions as a result of those procedures for the annual pilot revenue. Moving on to number two, this is one of our bigger procedures looking at economic activity taxes. So that was tracing the flow of funds from the various city, county sales tax items and making sure that that flowed into the Crackerneck Creek TIF as it was supposed to. So again, we documented the formula, we recalculated the amounts and compared it to the general ledger and management supporting documentation. The first finding, not really an exception from a dollar perspective, it's more so factual observation that we made, and that was the city originally had not excluded hotel sales tax revenue from the contributions to the Crackerneck Creek. But they looked at this again with the help of outside counsel, and in 2017 determined that that hotel tax should have been excluded per the terms in their interpretation of the TIF agreement. So all we said there was that in 2017 they made a retroactive adjustment to exclude the hotel sales tax revenue, which under the most current legal advice. And so we analyzed that adjustment as part of our procedure, and finding 2C2 just shows a small difference that we found in that adjustment, where the city took out $2,000 too much when moving from the county zoo to the Crackerneck Creek TIF. And then the third finding is related to that hotel sales tax adjustment that I mentioned before. The city does this using a few different tools, different sources of information, one of which is the monthly transient guest tax return that the hotel fills out. We recommended, or we noted that they used line 1 instead of line 3, and all that means is that the difference is an adjustment for 30-plus day hotel stays. And if you look at the definition of what a transient guest is in the agreement, that is does not include the 30-day guest. So we said that, hey, the difference would only be about $3,000 in the 5-year period. So it's a very small difference, but management would theoretically use line 3 going forward. The next procedure was related to state TIF revenue. So that comes in semi-annually. We applied very similar procedures to the previous procedures, and we found no exceptions in the area of state TIF revenues. Number 4 is talking about revenue from the Crackerneck Creek Transportation Development District. We were able to recalculate this using basically remittance totals from the State Department of Revenue. We had no exceptions in that area, but we did have a finding related to the fact that the city does not have authorization to view the list of businesses that are remitting taxes to the state. And the reason that's important is for us to get comfortable that the revenues are flowing to the TIF correctly. We need to make sure that the businesses who are part of this TDD are correct and are actually contributing to the Crackerneck Creek TIF. So because the city was not able to provide this information, we weren't able to finish this procedure, but we noted that the city is working on getting that authorization needed from the Missouri Department of Revenue. Number 5 is talking about transfers. So the Crackerneck Creek TIF gets revenue in part from the Little Blue Parkway TIFs. So the Little Blue Parkway TIF has in the agreement, a chain of command of how the revenue is supposed to, or how the excess revenue is supposed to be allocated. And after several factors, the last step is that it goes up into the Crackerneck Creek TIF. So we evaluated those transfers. We had a finding that management had not kept up to date with the transfers. So they made a transfer into the Crackerneck Creek TIF in 2016 and another in 17, but the city did not make any transfers in 18 and 19. And what that meant was that the funds were sitting in the Little Blue TIF, and management caught up with this at the end of fiscal year 2020 and made a large transfer to catch up. Okay. Number 6, we are talking about the 39th Street Transportation Development District. So that also, half of that revenue goes into the Crackerneck Creek TIF. So again, we documented the formula. We recalculated the amounts and compared it to the general ledger. We did find one exception, and that was 2 businesses were improperly excluded from the list of businesses that the city should have collected for from the 39th TDD. So we have no indication that the business is incorrectly remitted. It's rather that money was staying in the Crackerneck or in the TDD, and the city's procedure is to invoice the 39th TDD every month for their share of contribution. Well, those 2 businesses were not included, and so we estimated about $36,000 that was under remitted, but that's over a long period of time. It's over a 10-year period of time for one of the businesses, and then the other has been open for about 6 years. We also had a finding related to the 39th TDD where the city was actually adjusting out hotel guest tax revenue, but in this case, the terms of the 39th Street TDD agreement govern, not the Crackerneck Creek TDD, and there is no such exclusion in the 39th TDD agreement about hotel tax. So, relatively small adjustment. It was $4,000 estimated being under remitted. And that was discovered in 2017 when we had that attorney insight I mentioned earlier. And at the time, the finance director elected to make the change going forward, but not make the change retroactively. But again, that estimate would be just about $4,000. Almost done here. Procedure number 7 out of 10. We looked at the Bass Pro lease, and we made sure that Bass Pro is paying the correct lease payments to the city. That it was in line with the agreements. We recalculated it for those time periods in our report, and we found no exceptions as a result of those procedures. Procedure number 8 is kind of an all-encompassing procedure. The city keeps its records primarily for the TIF revenue on what we call a tax summary spreadsheet, and so we included that in our procedures to make sure that that was mathematically accurate and kept up to date. We also looked at interest income for 1 month in this procedure. Our finding related to procedure 8 was that the tax summary was not always kept to date, meaning there may have been accruals or subsequent adjustments booked in the general ledger, but they didn't go back and update the tax summary spreadsheet. Ultimately, the general ledger is the source of truth, and unless we noted otherwise above, we were able to vouch to the general ledger correctly. So this is more of an administrative record-keeping thing, and I will tell you this tax summary has been a working document for 10 years or so, and it's changed hands. And I think in recent years, we've seen improvements to the spreadsheet, and management will build upon that as we move forward into the future. So procedure number 9 is talking about disbursements from Crackerneck Creek TIF. So we tested a sample of disbursements that were reimbursements to developers, so we made sure that those were authorized by the finance department, by city personnel, and we made sure that those agreed to the general ledger. We had no exceptions in the disbursements procedure 9. And finally, to wrap it up, for procedure number 10, we looked at sales of parcels of land in the Crackerneck Creek TIF area. We documented how the sale of parcels are recorded in the city's TIF records, and we traced any reimbursements from the developer for the sale of parcels to the general ledger. That's what we set out to do, but our finding is that we found no evidence that we didn't find a provision where the city would receive payment for a sale of property in the redevelopment area. So there, that was our finding. We weren't able to completely do the procedure, and I think we just wanted to, confirm how that process worked and gain an understanding of that. And so that was part of the heart behind procedure number 10. So that's all I have for now. I guess I'll open it up if there are any questions, but thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Questions?
I guess my only question would be, with the exceptions found, have recommendations been made to make sure the exception doesn't happen in the future?
Yes, and we have had discussions with Brian and the finance director, and he has indicated how he will correct each of our findings. So as part of the AUP, we can't recommend how to do the finding or how to address the finding, but Brian and us have had those discussions, and management is working on that, yes.
Okay, thank you.
If the council would like, I could have Brian quickly speak to that, just so that the comfort level's there that this has been addressed.
No, I just wondered that,
Okay.
The fix is in, and we're going to get the fix fixed, and we'll be told when it's done.
Correct.
Thank you.
Councilman Huff?
Mr. City Manager, here in the last few weeks, the Zona Rosa, the county won that similar thing as what we're dealing with out there. Are we looking into seeing how they was able to achieve that and model maybe something after that?
Yeah, and just for the the public's benefit, I may say that there was a lawsuit involving the economic development project Zona Rosa in Kansas City North about who was responsible for paying that debt service. It was insinuated in the suit that Platte County, the governmental organization, was responsible for that. The judge in the case determined they were not. So I'll be working with our city attorney and our finance director and our finance bond counsel, Gilmore Bell. We want to review that. Obviously, that's of interest to us to understand the legal precedent set by that and how that impacts City of Independence as well.
One other thing, sounded like that our bookkeeping was pretty sloppy here. We're addressing that, so they said of switching to the hands so often, and they're kind of got sloppy, so I assume that we're on that.
Yeah, and I mean, let me begin by saying, ultimately I am accountable for what happens around here, but I will say that the audit that was done targeted, and Garrett could remind me what years it was, but the reason those years were picked because those were years of transition between two different finance directors. So we had a long tenured finance director that had left, and then one that served a few years before moving on as well. And Garrett's strategy with doing that was to pick those because those transition years are ones where either methodology can change, or with those transition periods things can fall in the cracks. And they identified things there that needed to be rectified and corrected, and Brian's team has made many improvements down there as a result of that.
Good, thank you.
Mr. City Manager,
Yes, sir.
just a couple of questions for you. First of all, just remind us what our financial obligation is going to be on repayment of this TIF.
Yeah, so it's the good and bad of the same coin, two different sides of the same coin. In municipal finance, it's really about trying to survive year to year. You try to have as best of a long-term strategy as you can, but you're dealing with changes that occur year to year. And throughout the last several, when the city began having to make debt service payments on the shortfall in 2011, that first one being about $3.5 million, a number of strategies were employed, and one of those, council member, was refinancing the debt to try to make those more manageable debt service payments, which was great because it eliminated the need for a general fund appropriation to make debt service payments. But the other side of that is that we are now extended the life of this debt service beyond the life of the TIF. So that is something that is going to be I would go as far as say, financial albatross for this city for at least the next 2 decades.
Okay, so now the obvious next question is, how do we get ourselves in this situation?
How did we get in this
Yes, sir.
situation? Well, I would say probably the most fair answer to that would be if you go back and review the minutes of the TIF commission when this project was approved, there was a question asked about how risky is this, and the bond counsel and the folks presenting the TIF commission that night, when you read those minutes, they say obviously there's some risk here, but we think that risk is mitigated by the probability that this will pay off. And obviously their crystal ball didn't work too well. They overextended what was thought would be the financial performance of that TIF. I know we can all point to the change in retail economics and all of that, but a monumental amount of debt was taken out to fund this project, and the performance has not been there to pay for that level of debt that was needed to make those annual payments.
Right. We could point to retail, but this was years before we started pointing to retail, right?
Yes, sir.
So what we want our taxpayers to know is that Crackerneck Creek development got a lot of money, and we're paying a big bill as a result of it, correct?
Yeah, we have been fortunate the last several years that we've not had to make that general fund appropriation to pay the debt service, but as I've told you, that has now come at a cost that you have refinanced these bonds
Sure.
well beyond the life of this TIF project.
And in terms of number 10, where it talked about the sales of parcels, are you telling us tonight that Crackerneck Creek didn't have to pay for any of the land? Essentially, they were given the parcels of ground to develop?
That is my understanding, and again, looking back at some of these historical documents, there was discussion among council members and appointed city staff about pursuing opportunities of litigation, et cetera. Ultimately, All that was done was to declare the developer in default by sending a letter, but nothing beyond that in terms of any kind of recourse occurred.
So we operated either through arrogance or ignorance. One of the two got us in this position, correct? I mean, I just can't believe that we had no language in a state where real estate law and language is, very specific, that we had no language to, I mean, when we went through this review, to find out that we got, what, 650, there was 650,000. 10 years later, there was no adjustment for appraised value, market value at the time. We just essentially just gave everything over to this development company. I think that's why Councilmember Huff asked for a forensic audit, because all this does is just shows that we really made a mess of this TIF. And we really don't have a lot of answers to give to taxpayers tonight. This doesn't give us a whole lot to go off of.
Yes.
So saying that, or I would assume then, so if things work out down there at a later date, I know there's some things coming up down there in that area, that since I guess we won't be have to give them any money as far as Crackerneck LLC or whatever it is down there. If I know there were some things that the mayor's working on down there. If there's, I know it's never made any money, so if it does, I'm sure the Paul's going to be out. So are we going to be assured that they're not going to get some more money out of this thing?
Yeah, we'll make sure the city is appropriately guarded for and negotiated in a very firm and adequate way.
Will they get the land for free?
I would.
So
These masks are great.
I have a question about that, and I'm very disciplined up here about not talking about rumors or things I heard or things that I remember, or trying to recall things from long ago. But the city did the city own that land? I'm interested in that comment because I don't remember that being a part of anything that, we've looked at since the time that I've been on the council. And of course, this way predates any of us. But I thought I would be interested to research that if you don't know the answer off the top of your head, about who contributed that land. Because I have a like I said, I don't want to sit up here and try to, speculate or say things that I'm not certain of, but I would be interested to know if the land was contributed as part of the project, who contributed that land?
What is clear is that the city did not own that land when the project started. What has been disputed back and forth but never litigated, officially ruled on, is the developer's responsibility for helping with debt service shortfalls. Right. And there's been some interest in the proceeds of the sale of that land when a project is built out there and it is sold to a third party to develop a restaurant or a hotel or whatever. Would
that money flow back to the city or back to the developers? That's okay.
That's what's been in question.
I see. Okay, thank you. I guess what I would, maybe this was not the right tool to get at the questions that perhaps the community wants answered. I think you did a fine job, gentlemen. I'm not sure that we, if there's some dissatisfaction on the council or among the community about the, information that we were able to provide this evening. This thing has been audited and audited and audited. We have had, and we are continually, just through our finance department, auditing this project. So maybe there's a different tool that we need to apply to get at these answers about what what went wrong and how do we not make the same mistake in the future. Like it or not, some of it is maybe, lack of foresight or hasty decision-making, although I would argue this was not a decision that was made hastily. I mean, I was a member of this community when this was going on, and there was a considerable amount of participation from the state and others, as was we heard tonight. And some of it is just plain circumstances. I mean, that every development agreement that we get into as a contributor in some way, whether that's through abatement or contribution of property or whatever, access to right of way, any of it, there's a certain amount of risk that is involved with that. And this one, as with the Santa Fe TIF, which we're going to hear about in a minute, the development didn't happen when it was expected to happen. A lot of time was lost in getting the development out of the ground. And in both of these cases, that proved to be very costly. And I don't know if, in the case that this council ever were to consider a development agreement, if there is language that can be put in that there are penalties for not delivering in a timely fashion. And in these cases, in this case in particular, there was no penalty to Bass Pro or some of the other key tenants for not delivering in a timely fashion and not delivering everything that they had promised, like a hotel, which then we waited a decade or more to see that developed. So, I think these are important questions, and seeing what's happening in Platte County, keeping a very close eye on on how this is going to be dealt with potentially in Jefferson City. We successfully fought off legislation that would have been detrimental to economic development during this past veto session that's still going on. So that's something to pay attention to. And, I think that that's probably what this council is interested in is, as we're heading into another potentially extended economic decline, or what are the things to watch out for that maybe we're not adequately caught in some of these past developments that have not been successful.
Certainly.
Yes.
I'm just glad we don't do these anymore, at least they haven't come forth. But my biggest deal with them is when they have a failed one, and which we'll see on the next one too, is this overlapping. As the auditors, do you see this overlap of TIFs very, very often? Or, I mean, it seems like they can't stand on its own, so we go and bum off of another TIF to pay that one. Is that a common practice?
This is Chester talking. Given my experience with others, it's all governed by what the TIF agreements allow, and if there are surpluses that can go back to the city, then they can be used for other purposes. So, I guess I'd put it back to the documents that are in place, which do interact with each other. But yes, that does happen.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Mayor, if I may.
Yes, Councilman.
To continue the discussion a little further, I was on the council at that time as this movement was going forward and a lot of the moving parts that was taking place here. I think this was voted on in October shortly. I was not on the council for that vote, but I was leading up to those discussions up until April before that. And it was very complicated, a lot of moving parts, a lot of discussions with the state, a lot of discussions with the residents out there, property owners and stuff. Highly, say a lot of moving parts here, a lot of lessons learned for sure. I was also part of the council at the time when TIFs were, tax instrument financings were used as tools for developments. And sometimes they worked quite well, sometimes they did not. Also make a point that some of those TIFs that were approved have been paid out early. Some of the TIFs that did fail, the Chinook one comes to my mind. It failed, and it also reimbursed the city. So it's a two-edged sword. There's been successful TIFs and TIFs that have failed, which led to reimbursements to the city. Financial tool that should be out there used. We don't use them as much for, depending on the project, and that's there for, but TIFs that have been used successfully, and then some that have not been so much.
Madam Mayor, may I quickly add too, and this will be presented in our next presentation on the Santa Fe TIF as well, but one of the things that was done by this council within the last year was the adoption of a economic development policy and the establishment of an economic development incentives commission. Both of those were really first for municipalities in the state, and I think we've made a very profound statement to our community and to the development community about what this council is willing to support at what level, so that the risk-reward trade-off can be vetted in a more methodical and well thought-out way, rather than our finance director has visited with me about this specific project. He was in a city that was competing against Independence for it at the time, and eventually it got too rich for their blood. And so now I think we kind of have something that will guide those decisions more than just gut feel and more to some kind of scientific methodology.
Okay,
Madam Mayor,
yes.
just a comment real quick, Mr. City Manager. It's clearly frustrating to all of us up here to think about the tax dollars that we've lost or the bad deal that was made. It's important to learn the lessons and not do it again, clearly. For me, really the most important thing moving forward is that we really drill down and be able to understand how much we're gonna owe on these TIFs and when. So like that we can have the, if we made a bad deal or a bad gamble, let's take the risk out of it. Let's just at least figure out what it's gonna cost for us to clear the books, whether it be a Platte County method where we don't pay it, or whether it be a, just a plan to refinance, or, whatever it would be for all these TIFs. I know we've got some that work, but some that don't. So I just, of course, just want to reemphasize to you that that definitely is a priority for us right now. On top of COVID, on top of fiscal, on top of the general fund balance, all these things play into it. We know it's top of mind for you too, but I think it would make the folks of this city a lot happier. Not happy with having to do it, but happier knowing that we're trying to be responsible about it and take care of it.
We've been working within the last year on a strategy to deal with all of these TIFs, which I again refer to as these financial albatrosses, so that we can minimize our losses and minimize the pain that's inflicted and get through this in a financially responsible way. And we'll work closely with the council to work our way through these and manage the problem as best as we can.
Can I just ask, I just want to ask one more thing, I'll be done, but Chester, on number 10 in your findings, where you talked about the sale of property in the redevelopment area, you stated in here that no sale, transfer, or other conveyance of any property in the redevelopment area may be made except to any entities or the parent corporations of such entities, including on a pre-approved tenant list or without the prior written approval of the city. Can you put that more in context for us? Why is, because I'm kind of with the mayor. We don't understand the relationship to the land ownership and why it was important to get approval from the city to do anything with it.
Yeah, and there might be someone else on the call too that could answer that as well. But my understanding of that is the city wants to make sure that whoever is the purchaser is going to abide by all of the rules of the TIF, and they know what they're getting into. So it's not like the property could be sold to somebody who's not going to participate in the TIF. The city is making sure that that new property owner will participate just as the other properties do in the requirements of the TIF. And that's my understanding of it.
Not sure anybody would want that land at this point. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions on Cracker Neck TIF? Okay. Then we will move on to Santa Fe. Mr. City Manager.
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of the council, 2 weeks ago at our study session, staff presented you an update on several tax increment finance projects for their 5-year review as required by state law. One of those projects that was reviewed was the Santa Fe TIF, which generated a great many questions. And we were asked by the council to spend a little more time with that one in particular so that we could dive into that, understand, again, historically how we got here a little bit better, where we're at today, just so that this is one, again, that has had some financial performance issues associated with it. So staff has prepared a presentation for you tonight. You're going to hear from Finance Director Brian Kidney, a little bit about some of our reporting tools. Our Community Development Director, Tom Scannell, is going to review the history of this project with you. And then, as I mentioned in the last presentation, Mark Randall, Assistant City Manager, will talk about some of the measures we've put in place to guard against future such issues becoming problematic for the city. So I believe Mr. Kidney will kick things off, and then the others will follow suit thereafter.
Thank you. Brian Kidney, the Director of Finance and Administration. I'm kicking it off, this presentation off first because one of the things that came up from our presentation 2 weeks ago was the idea of transparency and making sure that the citizens understand what all of this is, what all the economic development that we have out there, and that we have, what has bonds on them, what does not. So what I have here, I guess I'll go back a little bit. When I came on board, and about the week or so before I started doing a lot more research, and I saw 22 districts, and I thought to myself, this is going to be quite a challenge to get a hold of. It took me a while to get up to speed and understanding, well, this TIF funds this TIF and things like that. What the very first thing I asked for was from our bond attorney and from our financial advisor, can you please at least summarize these things? And so that's where I start. So whenever anyone asks me about a bond issue or any of these districts, I have this 3-ring binder that I pick up and I go to. Hopefully you had a chance to pick those up. We made copies of them for each of the council members. But even more importantly, we put all of those summaries also online, make sure that anyone can take a look at it. And what I have here is what we call our investment relations site. This page was originally set up, or is set up, for those investors that are wanting to purchase our bonds from us. And it was originally set up not quite a year ago in order to showcase the utilities debt. So you can see up here, and I'll just go over this real quickly. Sorry, there's a lot of screens on my side. That, we have a message from our wonderful city manager here, but it also, you can scroll through and see, for instance, here's the IPL bonds, rated A, and those are not working. Sorry, there we go. And then you can flip to the water and then also to the sewer bonds. So it was a place that I was able to showcase to potential investors of the city what we have. And if they're interested in purchasing our bonds, they can find out more about the city. So it's a typical thing when the city gets to about our size and the debt becomes something investors are interested in, you create an investor relations site. So as part of this, I realized that not only did we already have something set up really well, but it's also a good showcase to make it so the citizens could also get on there. And so that's what, anyway, putting all this together, we decided to also put together an economic development site. So And this just went live today. So what we have here is a transparency site that talks about all of the economic development districts and also of all the debt for the city. And we tried to arrange it that it's easy to go through, easy to track, but again, there's a lot of moving pieces, but hopefully we did a decent job here. So basically you go through here and pull up any of the districts, and so you can see, going through here, you have a map, an overview description of it, talking about the revenue sources, more revenue sources, but also talks about the debt associated with each one of these districts. And so on the right here, you can see where you can quickly go to any one of these districts. When you go back up here, one of the things, again, that I really struggled with was the location. And so I made sure we added a interactive map on here. So this goes out to the city's website about its different districts. And as it pulls up and it comes over here, it'll give you a legend of where in the city all of these items are located at. It also has, shows you what the different sales tax rates are by different geographical areas. So hopefully people, again, that's probably one of the biggest questions I get from a citizens asking me, wait a minute, what is the sales tax rate at this location, but across the street it's this location? I'm not saying people, are going to be out in the street and go, oh, well, I can go to this website, but at least there's a place that you can see it if you're so interested. And then it has the overlapping TDDs, TIFs, and also any CIDs out there. So hopefully people will find that of interest. Another area we put together definitely is the ratings for all the bonds. That's a question that I've received many times from this council. And so I summarized all the debt here by districts, and then you can actually see what they're rated bond-wise. And if you're interested and you really like this stuff, unfortunately like I do, then you download it, and you can actually read the assessment that was given at the time of the issue. In this case, this happens to be S&P rating on that particular bond issue. And again, it's as much information as a person really wants to do the paralysis by analysis kind of thing. You can really get down in here. But this is the website I go to. So anytime anyone has questions, I don't go to any documents that we have in the city. Everything I look at is online. So, and there's no hidden places on here. So everything I know about the bond issue, all the bonds, all the districts, are basically up here. So hopefully, again, there's nothing part of it that has to be redacted or anything. It's all public information. So I guess I would say, citizens, there you go, everything you wanted to know.
So, Brian, can I just ask you to back up for a minute and tell us, if somebody pulled up indeptmo.org, where would they find this?
Where would they find?
Yeah, I mean, is it under the finance section?
It's
or
under, we'll have a
how
link.
do they navigate to this?
I can't remember exactly where, but we will have a place on the economic development site, but then also have a place on it in the finance department site, and we'll have the links in both places. I think we've talked about we'd actually be able to put something on the front website or on the front side of.
And if somebody just went onto our website and typed something into the search bar and said bond ratings, would they get to this?
I would have to ask.
I mean, this is kind of a bit of a side conversation, but,
Yeah.
As we continue to talk about, I mean, having the information out there, and this is great, and thank you. I mean, I'm very grateful that you put so much work into this. And I think it will be very helpful, but, the other side of the solution is having it and then making it accessible so people can find it. So we can, talk with tech services to make sure that if people go out there and look for this, that they're able to find it easily.
Okay. There's a lot more information here but if you're interested, I could show you where you can actually see where each of the bonds that are currently still out there are being traded and what percentage rates they trade at. It really is all out there. So, so I would invite you to take a look at this, dig down in there. But again, I just wanted to showcase this part of it. This is what I use as a tool, and so I thought, well, why not just go ahead and share the whole thing? So that was the first question that came up about transparency. The second part was just a dig down further into the Santa Fe district itself, and Tom will take care of that part then. So if there's no other questions about this, I'll just turn that over.
Good evening. My name is Tom Scannell. I'm the Community Development Director. As Brian said, I'm going to go over the Santa Fe tax increment financing review, kind of a deeper dig into that TIF. So kind of what I'm going to cover is up on the screen. I'll go into a little more detail at each one of these stages, but you can see that the history of this TIF covers almost 8 years, about 7.5 years or so of time from when the TIF was first approved until the final action on one of the amendments for the redevelopment agreement. So December 22nd, 1997, TIF plan was approved. Blight declaration was also approved. It wasn't until 3 years later that you had the redevelopment for that TIF that was approved. And then later that year, in November of 2000, that's when you actually had the TIF project activated. That's what actually starts the 23-year clock. Fast forward about 4 years, and then you have the amendment number 1 to the redevelopment agreement. And then a few months later, in February of 2005, you have the amendment 2 to the redevelopment agreement. So just to help everyone remember where the Santa Fe TIF is located, it's located on the west side of Nolan Road, south of South Side by a few hundred feet, and goes all the way down to the intersection of Gudgel. And again, that's on the west side, and the west boundary is kind of the railroad tracks for a good portion of that redevelopment area. So back in 1997, the TIF area consisted of 32 parcels, and it was owned by 26 different property owners. In order to do the TIF project, the TIF developer needed to acquire those and to clear those. At the time, there was more than 108,000 square feet of existing structures in the TIF area. At the time, again, there was a blight declaration. The blight declaration said that they were obsolete and in need of repair and would need to be demolished in order to accommodate the redevelopment. The platting and the street layout were also inadequate. And the site had environmental problems. So all of those were things that the TIF Commission, Council, those bodies reviewed in their decisions. So a little bit about the details. The developer was MC Properties, LLC. Again, the TIF covered approximately 29 acres. TIF plan was to construct a little over 220,000 square feet of retail space, as well as 8 new owner-occupied residential units. Associated with that, we're going to be some off-site public improvements to Nolan Road.
Can I ask a question, Tom? Ken McLean is part of MC Properties. Were there other investors in that, or is he the only principal of MC Properties LLC? That's what I didn't recall the other week when we talked about this.
Correct.
I knew that Mr. McLean was, primarily involved with creating this, but I wasn't sure if there were others involved at that time. or if there currently are others involved.
So Ken McLean was the owner and had control over MC Properties. There were no other.
Okay, so
There were no other investors at that time.
Okay, very good, thank you.
So this slide here shows the layout that was presented as part of the TIF plan. You can kind of see down in the lower portion, there are some big boxes there, and there are some smaller boxes. Let's see if this cursor, right about here, if you can kind of see where my cursor's kind of sitting right now, and then they had a few retail pad sites out along Nolan Road. The TIF outlined total project cost of $25.5 million total project cost, and the developer was to be reimbursed $7.5 million. The TIF plan specifically allowed land assembly, acquisition, demolition, and relocation costs to be reimbursed back to the developer. A few of the more details, TIF plan, pilots generated, these are the property taxes over the 23 years, $8.8 million. The total EATS, this is the sales tax generated over the 23 years, was $13.7 million. Within the TIF documents, it said that the developer would be fully reimbursed by the project costs by January of 2014. This slide here, it's difficult to read on the slide, but it's included in your packet. This is the actual TIF budget. Down at the bottom, the second column, the right side column, this number here, total estimated project cost is $7.5 million. I'm going to bring your attention up to still the right column, but towards the top under the land assembly category. So the total land assembly was estimated to be $5.6 to $5.7 million for this project. So that is the TIF plan. That is what was approved in December of 1997. Fast forward to August 7th of 2000. So about 3 years later is when the redevelopment agreement was approved. This agreement, the city obligates to issue $7.5 million in debt prior to construction of the shopping center in order to reimburse the developer for the land assembly costs and other authorized expenditures. That ties back to that budget that was on that previous slide. Continuing on that redevelopment agreement, when this agreement went forward to the city council, the cover sheet provided an update on the land acquisition, the list of tenants, potential purchasers, those who've signed letters of interest, and also noted that the developer was set to break ground in September of 2000. Under the land acquisition, again, this was some documents that I found. The city did not use its power of eminent domain. That power of eminent domain was given to the developer, mainly for 3 properties. It was the Winsteads, the Pizza Hut, and the Knutson property. In going back through the documentation, found where that had gone to condemnation, and they had gone through those proceedings for those 3 properties.
Was that the Checkers?
Which one?
Knutson property.
I'm not exactly sure. There wasn't a lot of detail. Again, going back 20 plus years and some of the documents, so I wasn't able to
So, Tom, let me ask a question. How is it that the city can give power of eminent domain to the developer? I mean, Mr. City Manager, I'm not familiar with that process. Certain entities are imbued with the power of eminent domain, cities, school districts. So how is that transferred? that authority transferred to the developer.
It's not a practice that anybody on my staff had seen done before, and I can ask Brian Kidney to come up and go into a little more detail, but it's not a common practice.
Okay, okay. Wasn't familiar with it, but, all right, thank you.
I'd like to know also what the process that he used for the eminent domain.
Very good.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Tom, one other thing. You show the three that didn't, how many were eminent domain? How many properties? You show the ones that weren't, so evidently there was some that they did use that.
No, they used the power of eminent domain on just these three. All of the others, the developer and the property owner at that time were able to reach agreement on
Okay.
the sales price.
Okay.
So those three of the however many you told us that there were,
32.
were condemned.
Yeah.
And then that allowed that eminent domain to be triggered.
Yes.
To take those by, okay.
Madam Mayor, if I could real quick, our bond council representative, David Martin from Gilmore and Bell, is on the call right now.
Great.
Yeah, and so he could get into a little bit of detail about this eminent domain issue, if we could indulge real quickly.
Okay.
Okay,
That'd be
Dave?
great.
I feel like Regis Philbin here. Dave, are you there?
Okay, Dave.
I think I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so I think we probably need to look back specifically on that issue of sort of delegating the power of eminent domain. It is something that I've at least heard of, but is a little bit before my time in terms of implementation and common practice. And so I'm not familiar with the justification today for that action, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't something that existed, in 2000, which was 7 years before I went to law school, that may have previously permitted that action. So we can look into it.
Thank you.
All right, so as part of the redevelopment agreement, the update that they gave, these are the lists of the potential tenants that had either signed LOIs, which are letters of interest, or they had some type of lease associated with them. So you had the grocery store, a bank, a drugstore, Wendy's. The Winsteads that was there was going to remain. AutoZone was going to remain, Lakeside Kia, and then Radio Shack. So they had some pretty good interest on the development at that time. So fast forward a couple months. So the redevelopment agreement again was approved in August of 2000. The redevelopment project was activated in November of 2000. So again, that starts the 23-year clock on the TIF. Then over 2001, 2002, the developers out there acquiring the properties. In 2004, he brings forward an amendment, the first amendment to the redevelopment agreement. And what this does is that it reduces the reimbursable project cost from that $7.5 million down to $7,350,000. What this was, it was due to the reduction of the roadway improvements that were to be reimbursed back to the developer. However, the developer was still responsible for those road improvements as the development occurred.
So let me make sure I'm clear on this. I know there's a lot of details, so I don't want to lose my train of thought. So the reduction in the reimbursable cost was negotiated somehow, that the same level of improvements needed to be made, or the level of improvements was downsized by some way. So was the developer just responsible for more of the cost, but the same level of improvements, or was it determined that the original improvements were greater than what was necessary for the project?
No, so the developer was still, so the developer was going to pay a larger share of those public improvements.
I see, okay. So at that point, the developer assumed an extra, essentially $155,000 of his own expense for those road improvements?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Fast forward a few months to February of 2005, which is when amendment number 2 to the redevelopment agreement was approved by council. And in this amendment, those reimbursable costs were further reduced down to $6,684,523. Basically, what this did is took all the roadway improvements, so those were not reimbursable by the TIF. And then there was also some finance savings there that got it down to that $6,684,000. The developer was still responsible for the roadway improvements as set out in the TIF plan. And so,
Mr. Scannell,
yes,
sorry to interrupt you. Was the roadway ever improved under this TIF? Do you have any idea?
I really don't have any idea. Some of the improvements were some signals. I know there's not a signal out there at Nolan and Hereford. I think that was one of the improvements. I don't think that most of the improvements were done.
Okay.
But again, there was very little development activity out there. The properties were acquired, they were demolished, and so the traffic coming off the property was significantly reduced. So that's the history on this. So I covered roughly 7+ years of the TIF. So now I will turn it over to Brian Kidney to talk about the financial performance.
Mr. Scannell, before you go, was there ever an agreement as part of the TIF to keep that Winsteads? I mean, was that part of the TIF agreement?
It wasn't specifically called out, but it was listed as one of the tenants that was going to remain in the development.
Initially?
Yes, correct, yeah.
So for him to go back and to knock Winsteads down, did he have to come back and revise the agreement with the city?
Is your question to do it today?
No, so the Winsteads originally, if I understand correctly, had indicated that they would stay in that location. I presume that meant making some tenant improvements to their, some improvements to their existing facility. But then ultimately, they were removed or taken by eminent domain.
So they were going to stay within the development.
Oh, I see, but not that particular
Location.
Building?
That's my understanding.
Okay.
That they were going to stay somewhere in that development.
But with a new construction or remodeled or something, okay.
That was my read of the documents, yeah.
One more question for you, Mr. Scannell.
Yeah.
Apparently you're never going to get to go. When these amendments were made to the TIF, did you find anything in the records or notes or anything that indicated why, nothing had been done and why adjustments were being made? Anything at all about the discussion about development or?
I wasn't able to find any notes at all as far to why, why they took the road improvements out with Amendment 1, why they made the changes to Amendment 2.
Right.
I really didn't have a lot of detail.
Thanks.
And just one more thing, you had mentioned there was environmental problems out there. What did that consist of?
I think some of it was associated with Doubts Lake.
Yeah, okay.
And there may have been some other environmental issues out there.
I bet there's some out there right now.
Probably so.
So, Councilman Perkins, I don't want to put you on the spot, and I'm not going to ask people to, speculate and, depend on their memory bank, but my recollection, and this was years later because I was not here in 1997, I moved here in August of 2000, so this wasn't something that was really high on my radar until much later. But the Richards IGA was intended to really be the key tenant for that facility. I do know because Blue Ridge Bank was located inside the Richards IGA on 7 Highway in Blue Springs, that the company went out of business. The Richards IGA, and I don't know the details of why that was, but eventually that business closed all of their locations prior to this supermarket getting built. Is that your memory?
You're correct, Mayor. Tom Richards, Richards IGA out there in Susquehanna, that area did have, and I don't know what type of agreement, verbal agreement or written agreement, but they were going to be the anchoring store or potential anchoring store about the same time that they thought it was a good business sense to open up another store in Blue Springs in the old food barn, as they were being acquisitioned, the old food barns and stuff. So they were going toe to toe with a Price Chopper, and they failed at that one, which I think began to lead down to the road of different business decisions that they've made, which one was to back out of this TIF as well as also selling to the Costantino's family Sunfresh Market.
Okay, thank you.
I know the Richards family. I went to school with the grandson, and my understanding was they could never reach an amicable amount, in terms of margin for shelf. However it's calculated for grocery stores to be profitable, they could never come to that agreement, and so it was a back and forth for quite some time, and they eventually just backed out of it because they couldn't make it work for them.
Okay.
So I thought I would just go over really quickly the financial performance of the Santa Fe TIF. And so you can see the original estimate was $22.5 million. Obviously, the actual pilots at EATS came up to be about $360,000. There was interest earned on funds the city had on hand. And then in 2008, the developer did step forward and offer to make contributions into the development to make sure, or to help the city from having to make these debt payments. And so from 2008 to 2014, those contributions were close to $4 million. In 2014, in 2015 time period, the 23rd and Nolan TIF went into place, and which was also a development by the same developer. Mm-hmm. And one of the projects within that development was the McDonald's and I say Walmart store. Is that not right?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so. I think it was the Quick Trip
and
the McDonald's. The Walmart store does come into this whole picture, but the development by this developer was the Quick Trip and the McDonald's.
Okay.
Is that correct, Mr. City Manager?
I
mean, the Walmart's way down at the other end of the...
I know this specific developer was involved with the development of the McDonald's and the Quick Trip right there. As the mayor stated, the Walmart neighborhood market project helps feed in and covered debt service on this, to Councilmember Huff's previous point, but the developer specifically in question with this Santa Fe TIF was involved with the McDonald's and Quick Trip.
Okay,
Okay, my apologies there. So the McDonald's, but then the Walmart store is involved in this, and that has been since 2015 has been transferred about $5.1 million into the Santa Fe. If we were to project that on out to the end of 2023, that would be a total of $12.4 million. And then as part of some of there were two refundings, debt refundings, as part of these transactions, as part of the debt since initial, and there were some gains, and there's also a reserve funds, and so I counted those as on the revenue side just to get it to balance. I will point out that the date that I have here is November 5th of 2023 because that's when the revenue side stops, that's when the TIF ends. However, if I go over to the debt side, you'll see that the debt service goes out until 2045. So, and I mentioned there were 3 separate debt issues. The first one, these are the debt service payments that were made against Series 2002, and then there were $6.8 million paid against the 2007, and then of 2015 debt. Now, the 7 paid off the 2s, and the 15s paid off the 2007s, I should say. So the 2015 debt service, if it's held out all the way to 2045, would be $15.6 million. So that's a total debt service of $26 million.
Okay.
Is that, Mr. Kidney, is that, will that be the total debt paid for this TIF, $26 million, if it runs out to 2045?
Yes, if it runs out, that's the principal and interest. So you need to think just like, if I took out a $160,000 mortgage on my house. I think
right.
The Truth in Lending said I borrowed $400,000.
Right.
And you're seeing the interest, accumulated interest also in these amounts.
That's where we at,
Yeah.
So, is the number on here what it would be at the end of the TIF? Is that 20 million?
Yes, correct.
So we'd have to come up with 20 million in cash to pay it off on that day.
Actually, if you go back, the shortfall would be $6 million. If you go back to the revenue side, the revenue is 20.37 million. The total expenditures is 26 million. So it'd project a $6 million deficit.
But
If nothing, if there's
then
no,
the contributions stop, and only the debt continues.
Well, in 2020,
The income stops.
in 2023, the revenue stops.
Right.
For that TIF.
So we either pay 6 million then, or we just drag out the debt and we're just.
So this is an item that has come up quite a bit in discussions as we're looking at refunding some of the Crackerneck debt.
Yeah.
Because obviously they don't want us to issue more debt if we don't have an answer of how to pay this deficit off.
Right.
Right? I mean, I
Right,
wouldn't.
right.
So this particular one, however, even though the revenue shuts off in 2023, there's still an opportunity, if you will, for a development to occur between now and 2045. So the idea, there's always hope, if you will, that there could be some more development in there, and that the city, instead of, it wouldn't be a TIF, but yet we would say the city revenue from this development would be used to pay the debt on this. So it's kind of hard to say exactly what the deficit may or may not be, because we don't know what it's going to be 2045.
If we sat here today with no development though, the balance projected with the income the revenue that's been generated, it'll be 6 million. That'll be our debt on that TIF.
Estimated to be $6
When the
million.
TIF ends, technically that'll be the debt, 6 million.
Correct. If there's no other sources that's identified.
Okay, here's my other question. If you go on the financial performance page, it says the volunteer developer contributions. Maybe I'm a couple pages up, I don't know. it says 3.9 million. So the developer paid the city back 3.9 million? Is that what that is?
Yes.
Okay. Did the developer receive the other money from it was initially 7.5?
Yes. It wasn't the 7.5, it was the 6, whatever that
It,
lower amount was.
it went down to that 6.6, so it was 6.6 is what the developer got, and then we got paid back 3.9.
Wait, is that?
I think
I have
they-
a question
Yeah.
about that, because I thought the 6.6, which got reduced from 7.5 to 6.6, was reimbursable expenses, and he hasn't submitted costs to be reimbursed to the tune of $6.6 million. So, I mean,
I think the 3.9 is the interest payment on the bonds made by the developer, is what I think that is.
We received 3.9 million from the developer.
right.
And we use that to pay the interest on the bonds.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, those were debt service payments.
But it says
Regardless, I mean, it's $4 million
Right.
that the developer paid voluntarily, that he was not legally obligated to pay, other than, as you explained to us the other week, Mr. Kidney, a moral obligation. There's no legal obligation. But I want to make sure that we're clear, and I know maybe we're going back a long ways in history here. I think the bottom line is how much has the city paid, or what has this cost the city, and how much has the developer paid towards the city's cost? Now, I do know what happened in 2014, why those contributions ceased. And I don't know if this is part of your report or not, Mr. Kidney, but I was on the council at that time, and we were seeking to refinance this, and we could not do that with the developer making the payments. The developer was asked by the city to stop making the payments so that we could refinance this. And maybe David, our bond counsel, could shed some light on why that would be, but we could not refinance these bonds adequately without indicating that we had paid. I mean, us not paying them inhibited our ability to refinance to the best of our ability. David, does that,
Sure.
what I'm saying, make
I
sense?
can jump in on that. So the reason, and I'm speculating because I wasn't involved in that transaction, but the reason would most likely have been that the refinancing was being undertaken on a tax exempt basis. And if you have
Correct.
private payments from a private company that are being infused into the debt service repayment revenue streams, you have limitations on that, pretty strict limitations in order to issue tax exempt bonds. And so the voluntary payment that had been occurring was replaced with a scheme where there were Nolan Road Project 3 and 4 revenues coming in, a super TIF, as we like to call it, which is basically the city pledging a portion of the uncaptured amounts from one of its sales taxes, in this case, a general sales tax, from project areas 1, 2, 3, and 4 within the Nolan Road TIF. And then only after that, combined with the pilots meets, minimal as they may be, from Santa Fe, did the developer incur a further obligation to reimburse the city for debt service payments that the city had to make out of pocket after all those revenues were considered.
Okay.
And is that language in the existing refinance?
It's not really built into the financing documents. It was a separate agreement that was between the city and the developer. and it was sort of in exchange for some of the redevelopment that occurred in the Nolan Road district.
But it's documented.
Correct.
Yes, and it's also on that great transparency site that you saw. It does spell out that the developer still is subject to paying in if the Nolan Road TIF does not meet certain thresholds. And so if the Nolan Road isn't able to produce enough to make that transfer, then the developer then would also we would bill the developer for the difference.
Right, so, once again, we overlapped, so we can bail that one out with $5 million, because that is a total failure of $7 million. So we went to 23rd Street to bail this thing out, so now everything looks hunky-dory for that developer. And make it max and get his TIF in, because I can take 5,000 or 5 million off that 12.9, it makes 7. Down on the actual.
Is there any other questions about the financial piece?
Is that all that you have?
I wanted to confirm, if it's possible to confirm, do we know that the developer received that $6.6 million?
It appears that he did get reimbursed from the TIF dollars for that portion.
Okay.
Okay.
And then the payments we know of that he made back were that 3.9.
As I've been able to identify, yes.
Now, it says here that the city must bill the developer for the reimbursement on or before June 1st and December 1st of each year with a calculation of how the city arrived at the amount billed. Do you have that?
Do I have the calculation?
Yeah. Do you have that? Do we know what?
Yeah,
what
oh,
he's
sure.
been
Yeah,
billed?
we do that calculation every year.
And we know what he's been billed?
He has not been billed anything since he's met those thresholds as required in that language.
He met the, I don't mean to
No, go ahead.
jump on your toes, Mr. Steinmeier.
No, go ahead.
So in other words, because the other TIFs are paying enough, we haven't been billing him. The other TIFs have covered the super TIF that the attorney, David, mentioned. Since that's covered the payments, he doesn't get billed. The developer.
So as I understand it, and of course Dave would correct me if I'm off on this, the agreement is in regards to the Nolan district. The payments from Nolan Road are not necessarily covering the entire debt service in Santa Fe. It's covering all but, I would say, maybe $100,000. I think that currently Santa Fe has about a $100,000 deficit each year
Okay.
that's building up to that $6 million that we've talked about.
Okay.
However, on the transfers, the transfer that is made from Nolan to Santa Fe, there's a calculation that goes into how much that transfer should be, and if it produces enough surplus to make that transfer, then the developer's not billed. If the calculation for the level that transfer does not meet that threshold, then the developer's billed that separate. The difference.
It's met enough to meet the threshold in the agreement.
Yes.
It has not met enough to cover the entire payoff.
The annual
Because
debt-
it's
debt
leaving
service.
it's leaving $100,000 in there every year.
Approximately.
But it's
Right.
not, okay, I got it.
So, just walk me through this for a second. So, the 23rd and the Nolan Road TIF has helped offset some of the cost. That, let's face it, there's no pilot money really coming in off of lumps of dirt on Nolan Road. So how is he making this work financially when you're not generating any sales off of dirt lots? How does this work?
As you can see, it doesn't work. The Santa Fe is not producing enough to make its own debt service payment.
Okay.
That's why the Nolan Road,
Well, that's why I'm confused why we're not billing him.
So,
at the-
Mr. City Manager.
Yes.
Refresh my memory. I'm looking at the map in the book that shows the Santa Fe Trail TIF. I thought, and maybe I saw this on your map earlier, Brian, that in order to pick up the McDonald's and the Quick Trip, which Ken McLean developed, we redrew the TIF boundaries to pick those up.
Correct.
Which isn't, I don't think, reflected in the map that's in this big notebook that you gave us. So, I mean, in order for that to be legal, David, we needed to redraw those TIF boundaries to pick up those extra properties that this same developer attracted and developed in order for the proceeds, the pilots and the eats for those two successful developments on a corner, all of two major roadways, to flow back to help this out. And, some people may categorize that as bailing out or whatever, but the goal is to fund this debt service, and this development is blighted. Let's just say it. I mean, this area of Nolan Road, and I don't have a clear recollection of what the area looked like before these buildings were gone in and acquired at the developer's expense to redevelop this area. But clearly, it must have been an initiative of the city to generate some, I say that as not necessarily, I mean, it would be interesting, and if we don't have them in our official documents, we could, certainly look at, the Examiner archives and see what the news coverage was surrounding this. But there had to have been a desire of the community or the city council or somebody to say, we need to try to spur some development on Nolan Road. And we can see many efforts have been made and continue to be made. I know of at least 2 applications that we participated in to get housing tax credits to put housing around Douts Lake. Both of those that I'm aware of, were rejected. So, efforts have been made on a mid-block stretch of Nolan Road that's on the wrong side of the street for a supermarket. It's catching people going to work, not coming home, which is why the Walmart market was successful. If you look at Nolan Road, every supermarket's on the east side of Nolan Road. I think, and even in the case of Cracker Neck Creek, with the city pledging proceeds towards the debt payment, the goal is to try to get this debt payment as far down as you possibly can. That has been the goal. If we want to change that goal, that's fine, but we need to have a better understanding about what the ramifications would be if we would just say, we're not going to do that. We're just going to have each one of these stand alone, and they can sink or swim, and what does that mean for us? But on this one in particular, I would like to know how much has the city contributed, how much are the taxpayers, out on this, and how much has the developer invested in it? As Councilman Hobart said, in the end, presuming nothing more ever gets developed there by 2023, what's going to be the bill that's going to come at the end of this? So, I think that would give some clarity. But I think your map in this book is outdated, because I think am I correct, Zach, that we...
Yeah, that was the map when the project was originally approved.
Yeah, okay.
That does not include present-day TIF boundaries.
So we didn't just pick up a couple properties someplace else in town and throw them on here. We redrew the TIF district?
That's right.
Okay.
And Mayor,
What
to
was
your,
that? I'm sorry.
oh, go ahead, council member.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, to your point thus far, I can't answer that. The city has not, as of yet, had to support this project financially in terms of debt service payment, et cetera. What you've seen on here, though, is that day is looming with that $6 million shortfall when this TIF terminates, and then there's still outstanding debt service of $6 million. And so that's where, as of today, we've not, but issues are coming down the road.
So we have paid 0 on the Santa Fe TIF.
As of today. Now, to Councilmember Steinmeier.
And the developer is paid 3.9 million.
That's right.
Okay.
But I want to also point out for Councilmember Steinmeier, because that question came up a minute ago. With every TIF, there's these certified eligible project costs for reimbursement. And something I'm hearing that we need to, outstanding item that we should get for the council is what were those outstanding items in the amount that were submitted for reimbursement that totaled the $6.6 million? Because clearly it's not all the stuff that was generating the pilots and the each to support the project, but it was some of those obviously underlying initial project costs. But I'll get that report prepared for the council and turned around in the next day or two.
Well, I also want to say that, yes, he's paid back 3.9, but he's also made 2.7 million for giving us lumps of dirt.
You know, I want to,
And I
Mr.
just
City-
want a little clarification
Yeah.
on what I said earlier. I was saying I wanted to stand alone. It's not that I would ever let one of these fail, because I know that, we're obligated to pay it. What I'm getting tired of seeing is robbing Peter to pay Paul. That's all, that's my statements about that. It wasn't being we're just gonna let these things fall flat and not worry about them.
Well, we want them to all be successful.
We do.
Yeah.
I want to make the comment, though, Mr. City Manager, there needs to be some clarification, I think.
Okay.
To be very clear, you're saying the city hasn't paid out of the general fund or otherwise written a check to cover this obligation to date.
The debt service obligation, correct.
But let's be clear, there's at least $5.1 million that was collected tax money paid by the folks that live here and work here and go shop at these places. That's tax money that otherwise would have been somewhere else.
What that 5.1 would have done was paid off that other TIF sooner, rather than being used to support this one.
Right. So, which would be the intended purpose, obviously.
Yes, that is always the end game. Yes, sir.
And certainly that's a calculated part of doing a TIF, but that's part of an economic development plan that ideally benefits the citizens. So when it doesn't, we are spending money on this TIF. It's just not coming directly out of our pocket.
Certainly.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay, thank you.
Well.
Oh, you have more?
Yes, we thought we would save the cheerful part for last.
The good news.
So, again, the question has been asked many times, what would we do now so we would not get into these issues? And the council has passed a policy, I believe it was last year, that did change how we approach these economic development deals. And so Mark Randall is prepared to give a small presentation then on what we've done now.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
why they're changing hats over there, just for a little back history, this Santa Fe TIF was brought forward and it was moved forward by the idea to redevelop that section over there. There was plenty of public comment, plenty of public input that went through there, and also went through the TIF Commission as well, which is also made up of all the taxing jurisdictions, reviewed, processed through. I even want to say that, going by memory, there was our state senator at the time was also pushing through and working through on the state level to make this a successful TIF. So this wasn't something that was just pulled out of haphazardly. This was, believe it or not, was a lot more well thought out on the legislative side and most certainly on the community side, that this was going to help redevelop this side of town. And really drawing from memory, I do believe there was some capital improvements made through some of the streets and some of the widening and curbs and gutters along there.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Randall.
All right, thank you. Mark Randall, Assistant City Manager, and it's a pleasure to be here to wrap this up. And as this last slide indicates the economic development policy that was adopted by the City Council in 2019 places limitations on city-backed debt, which it would preclude projects which would involve the city providing credit support for project financing. In your packet, you have a copy of that policy, and it's available online as well. And in several places in that policy, you'll find this following statement, quote, it says, "In no event shall the city consider project incentives which will require the city to lend its credit support to project bonds or other obligations of the applicant." Specific locations for this can be found Section 4A1B, which is in the chapter on Chapter 100 tax abatement, Section 4A2B, which is Chapter 353 tax abatement, Section 4B1B tax increment financing, or TIF, and Section 4B3B, which is talking about community improvement districts, or CIDs. Note that the section on the policy dealing with TIFs goes a little farther even, and includes a statement in Section 4B1C to the effect that the city will give most favored status to, or encourages projects that are pay-go or pay-as-you-go projects. Those would be favored over projects involving bonded debt, even though the city is not backing the debt. The city would still prefer it to be a pay-go project. Now, the only incentive program in that policy that does not have this prohibition is neighborhood improvement districts, and that's for a very good reason. NIDs are kind of a different animal. They are not bonds that are requiring revenue produced by development to pay off the debt. NIDs are used as a great tool in the right circumstances. The city issues bonds, issues special assessments, which pay those bonds off. The special assessments are a debt that remains with the property. And so that's how those bonds will be paid off. So the city may find that it's to your interest to issue city-backed bonds for a NID project, realizing that it can only be used for a public improvement that you think is a worthy public improvement, and those would be paid off by special assessments on properties in that district, and it stays with those properties until paid off. So that's a different animal, and so that's the one exception to that statement that I read first about how we're not doing any more projects that require the city to provide credit support to bonds for the project financing. Also, as it says on the slide there, that limits on the amount of public support are also included in the policy, and it's based on the quality of development. As you go and look at it, there are charts in there that will say that for a certain amount, we're requiring jobs to be created, we're requiring investment to qualify for a certain amount of investment or incentives. And we're limiting the total amount the city would be participating in this development. So, and it also has in there, as far as talking about quality, there's a lot of requirements in there. Some are mandatory and some are preferred that talk about quality. So it just says things like, we're not going to talk about a project that doesn't meet our comprehensive plan. We're not going to talk about a project that doesn't have high wages or that isn't somehow a benefit to our community. So there are a lot of those in there, and I encourage you to take a look at that policy and see those. The other thing it says that it refers to the Economic Development and Incentives Commission. And the thing that's really great about that is all of these incentives have to be now reviewed by the Economic Development and Incentives Commission, other than TIF, which is already reviewed by the TIF Commission and has an identical membership. The EDIC and the TIF Commission the EDIC is made up of representatives of the other all the taxing jurisdictions. They all went in together, they're all on this commission, they review these incentives. They all reviewed this policy, and they all voted unanimously in favor of this policy and the limitations that it has. So this is our way of going forward to make sure that development is going to be reasonable. The incentives will be reasonable, they'll be transparent, and they will not threaten city finances in the future. So that's the way we're doing business now. The policy is online there, and it's in your packet, so I encourage you to take a look at that, but that should, hopefully that's good news to end the evening on this presentation anyway. Are there any questions about it?
Questions? Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Next up is our state of emergency proclamation review. Mr. City Manager.
Yes, Madam Mayor, members of the council, the March 13th, the City Council adopted the state of emergency proclamation related to the COVID-19 public health crisis. That was updated several weeks ago to try to enforce compliance with the mask mandate. The council also asked that that be reviewed every 30 days just to make sure of how we feel about that. So tonight, Diane Egger, who's been leading our enforcement activities since the onset of the pandemic, is here to give you just a little bit of an update about what that enforcement activity has looked like as you contemplate and consider elements of that proclamation.
Okay, thank you. Hello.
Hello, good evening. This will only take me like 3 hours, so I think we're being
Good.
We'll be out. No.
Hey, Diane, pull that mic down just a bit, would
Okay,
you? Yeah,
there we go.
thanks. You gotta really get on top of it.
Okay.
Thanks.
Well, good evening, Mayor, Council. My name is Diane Egger. I am the Environmental Compliance Manager for Municipal Services. And I'm here this evening at your request to give a brief overview of what the city's been doing for the COVID-19 enforcement response. From March 13th, when the mayor declared a state of emergency, until today, city staff has been working to keep our citizens safe by enforcing the Jackson County Recovery Plan orders. We are currently in phase 2.5 of the Jackson County Plan, which includes mandates for face coverings in public. I believe that is why I'm here this evening, have been asked here this evening. But before I talk about that and answer your questions, if you'll just permit me to give a little bit of information and accounting of my work at the city and why I was asked to oversee this response by the mayor and the city manager. I have been a city employee for 24 years. Nearly 20 of those years were spent in some form of regulatory enforcement. I was a health inspector, an environmental health supervisor, a property maintenance manager, and for a brief time, I oversaw the business license division and community development. I left community development a little over a year ago, and I am currently at the Rock Creek wastewater treatment facility. But when I was asked to help to oversee the enforcement portion of the city's response, I did not hesitate. I worked the last pandemic that the city saw, the H1N1 pandemic in 2009, and over the years I've worked multiple outbreaks and emergencies in the city. Norovirus, Shigella, tornadoes and floods, all that have impacted businesses and citizens in the city. I have worked with these businesses hand in hand to help them rebuild, to reopen, all while keeping the public safe. The City of Independence has a long history of being on the forefront of public health issues. We have regulation, communicable disease, enforcement, and emergency response that we've all been given accolades by fellow municipalities for. We were the first to institute food handler classes in the 1960s, which teaches food safe practices for our restaurant workers. And in 2009, we were deemed the best in the area by an expose done by the Kansas City Star on our food inspection program. We were recognized as Certified Project Public Health Ready in 2005, 10, and 15, which was awarded to the city for being prepared for emergencies just like the one today that we are in. I take great pride in the work that we have done and that we continue to do. So since March until today, I have been overseeing the enforcement for this pandemic and utilizing the health inspection staff from community development to help me with that enforcement, even though I'm not their boss anymore. Thank you, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
And I mention all that not to brag, but to let you know that we have experienced people and staff taking the lead on the city's enforcement response. there have been many changes and additions to the county orders, as we know. In the beginning of the pandemic, it was decided by all Eastern Jackson County municipalities that we would all abide under the county orders and the mandates. What started as a stay-at-home order has evolved into phase 2.5 of the Jackson County Recovery Plan. How do we enforce the county 2.5 recovery plan? First and foremost, we educate. We try to educate the public. And the public at this point, I think, is well aware of most of our orders. And I must say that I'm truly proud of the city and the citizens in this community. The vast majority, I'm going to guess, don't quote me. Everybody quotes me because I'm here, we're getting recorded. 99% is in compliance. 99% of the people that I talk to on the phone, the businesses that we deal with, know and are willingly complying. And that's what we're after. In all regulatory, all through my career for the 20 years, all that we are after is voluntary compliance. I have received, under the 2.5 plan since July 1, on the mask mandate, over 400 complaints that I've worked about the 2.5 orders. These are all citizen complaints about businesses not complying with the orders, because these people that call me that I receive complaints on want to see the people wearing masks out there. And how we get complaints, how I get complaints is the citizens will call the county will send the complaints, if they're in Independence, to me, and then I will give them either to staff or work them myself. So once we receive these complaints from the county, this is the process that we do. The first complaint that we receive about a business not complying with the face covering mandate, we visit the business. And if the business is found not in compliance, so we view them, observe them violating that order, we give them a copy of the mandate. And we explain why they should wear a mask, and we answer any questions that they have. The second complaint, if we receive one on the same establishment and the same business about the same issue, we will give them, go there, confirm the complaint. If it's confirmed, then we will give them what we call a second and final warning. And at the bottom of that second and final warning, it says, quote, "Future violations may result in a general ordinance summons with the possible revocation of the business license and termination of utilities," end quote. Discussion, then we leave. If we receive a third complaint on the same facility and we go out and we verify that, then we will proceed with the GOS ticket written and the termination of the utilities. But I am pleased to say that as of today, we have not had to take that third step with any of our businesses in regards to this mandate. We have not had to pull the utilities for any of our businesses for violating the mask order. And we only have one business that's on the second and final warning. So I'm very pleased with the compliance when we go out there. People may not like it. Nobody likes to wear a mask. It's hard to talk up here, you know, but it's something that the county has mandated that we are enforcing, and that I think is very important, and people are complying. The vast, vast majority are complying. It is the outliers that we ever even have to visit. So with that, I am happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Diane, and thank you for stepping up when you were called upon to step outside of your normal job duties here at the city to help and bring all of your years of experience to help us coordinate this effort. It's greatly appreciated. I think it would be helpful for people to understand if we are under normal circumstances, and there's no pandemic, there's no mask orders, you're supposed to be staying home, telling your employees to stay home if they're sick, if you're contact traced or you have confirmed employees with confirmed COVID cases who are continuing to come to work. I mean, these are the types of things that we that you're now currently encountering.
Yes.
But, remember back before March and the regular everyday world of regulation, if you find a property code violation, a health code violation, what are our normal steps? I mean, what authority do you have under regulated services to essentially close a business down temporarily for non-compliance with any kind of multitude of
We have very broad
advantages?
authority to do that. And that would happen often as a health inspector or as their supervisor. If we see a facility, it really will only take one violation to close a restaurant if it's bad enough. If you have sewage, something like that, then we can close that facility. The old school way was if I'm not going to get into critical, non-critical violations, but if they had enough violations, then they would get closed. And when I was a health inspector, and we had 4 health inspectors at the time, but it was routine. Probably every month we would close a place, once a month. We would have to, just out of non-compliance. We would go in there, if it was bad enough, like they didn't have water or something like that was a true public health threat, then we would shut them down immediately. If it was something that they could correct, and it wasn't an immediate public health threat, but it could be, then we would give them 24 hours to correct, 24 to 72 hours, depending on the violation. Sometimes they didn't correct it, and we would have to close them down. No, the minute they corrected the violation, we would open them back up. Because really, the goal of public health is voluntary compliance. Please just don't make people sick when they eat at your restaurant. Please
So if
don't
they
infect people.
if they didn't have a health permit, we didn't, if it's a retail store, if they don't have a health permit, then we can't take away their health permit that's what's changed in my understanding of it during the pandemic, is if it's a retail operation that doesn't have a health permit,
Right.
the only thing that we have to take
Right.
is, they can operate without a business license. It's illegal, but they could do it. But they can't operate without utilities.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
And that's what you see in the case with Kansas City. And with the experience that we have on staff and with upper management, it was discussed, what do we do in the beginning of the pandemic when you're staring at a pandemic and you don't know how many people are going to die? And it was truly frightening, I'll be honest with you. At the very beginning, in March, we didn't know how many people were going to get it, who would infected. So you're sitting at a table determining what about, because doing this for 20-some years, there are going to be people that refuse to comply just because they refuse to comply. What do you do with those outliers, even if it's 1 in the city, 2 in the city? What do you do with those? And they get COVID and they refuse to wear a mask. Do you allow them to infect people unknowingly? The people that are going in will be unknowingly collecting COVID. Do you allow that? And it was determined the most extreme, the only way to really do it, so they don't have a permit, they keep opening. So they don't have a business license, they keep opening. The only thing that can really stop that is to terminate the utilities.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Yes, Councilman Huff.
On this, with codes and everything, of course, you have something to correct out there, mow the grass or whatever, in 30 days or whatever. So what's your time span for compliance of a mask? If someone calls in, you go out there and everybody's got their mask on. Is that a violation? And then you hold that for 3 weeks, a month, for another call? Or if it's even confirmed, what's your time span for number 2, number 3 utility shutoff? Is this a day-to-day?
Well, because it's such a short, we've only been doing this since July 1. Since July 1, we've been doing this, so there really isn't, 1 case a month and you're good. You don't really start from square 1 or square 0. But everything is case by case. If we go into a facility and everybody's wearing a mask, you have the one random customer that comes in without a mask. Can you ask them to put a mask on? If they refuse, they have a medical condition. There's nothing we can do about that.
Right, and I had
It's people that refuse. There are people that refuse to do it.
And so, as a business owner, a particular one, I had some calls on the laundromat. or laundry deal anyway. And so the people are in there, they got their laundry in the washing machine, and the washing, they peel off a mask, and you walk in and say, hey, that guy ain't got no mask on. I mean, how is that, how do you jam up this business owner because you have non-compliance of a person? I mean, you take their laundry and throw it out the door? I mean, what, I don't know what your expectation is for a business owner if someone comes in. I mean, every place I go, it says, wear your mask on the door. So you go in there with your mask on. If you get up from the table to go to the restroom, you put your mask on. Well, I mean, I don't understand when you get to that point.
So what you're asking, so it's the county orders that I'm enforcing. So when we had multiple business, this has been a 6-month-long process. All through all these different phased orders, we've had questions come up. And they're the county orders, I'm just enforcing them. So if there was something like that, there would have been many, many things like that, and I would call the county. What do you want us to do in this instance? And they said, they have to wear a mask to enter the building, or make a special accommodation for those that refuse. That's what the county says. I'm not making those up, that's from the county.
It's a difficult thing. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Are you done? Okay. It's a difficult thing when you put public sector against private sector. Okay? And I listen, I grew up in a small business home, and you know, our biggest issue every day was, did we make enough to put food on the table and keep shelter over us? And when you're operating at 50% already, county, right, public order, and you have businesses that need 80% of occupancy to make money, it puts a strain on that private sector. Mm-hmm. And then they ask you, or the county, the public sector, to come out and say, hey, Mr. Business Owner, now you have to be a mask cop. You have to make sure everybody's wearing these. And it's difficult. It really puts a lot of stress. I think people have been very compliant, mm-hmm. but they're getting tired of it now. We heard the term flatten the curve, flatten the curve. What was the curve that we were trying to flatten?
Are you asking me that?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a doctor,
yeah, I know.
And I don't work for the CDC.
I understand.
So if I'm given the mandate, or I'm giving any job
right.
from the city council or
right.
the city manager, I'm going to perform that job.
I understand.
So the job that I received from the county was, these are the mandates,
okay.
and this is what we want, and it's my job to get it done, and I'm going to get it done.
Okay. Well,
Madam Mayor, if I may.
Yes.
keep going.
Thank you. This is definitely a crazy, weird time that we're living in, no doubt. I work in the grocery business. I saw things in March that I hadn't seen in the 31 years I've been doing this. So it's completely crazy. I follow government my whole life. I think everybody here has been able to see the fact that we have a nationwide global pandemic with this mask ordinance. Diana has just said that 99% is in compliance. I strongly believe that, 100%. There are those who do not want to follow that, want to do that. So we need to give our staff that teeth for those who do. And I can think of 2 of them off the top of my head who have been quite the pain in the butts for no reason. There's reasons why we do the things that we do, and people have been quite patient. We need to move forward with that patience and just push through this for sure. I don't necessarily think that there's a battle between public and private. I think everybody understands that we need to push through this and move forward with it and do it in a way that makes sense. I work in Kansas City. My company policy is you wear a mask, otherwise we will ask you to leave. We will not eat, we will not serve you. And that policy is enforced quite strictly. So thank you for everything you're doing. You've been put in this role. So thank you for stepping up and doing that. This isn't normally your job, and 400 calls is quite a bit to get out there and look and research and see who's doing what. So thank you for your help with that.
My pleasure.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, thank you, Diane.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. City Manager, CARES Act funding update.
Okay, I'll give you a different look at me from this angle here.
All righty.
Meg, I'm not even going to pretend like I know how to use this thing. Thank you. Okay, Madam Mayor, members of the council, tonight I want to quickly give you an update on our spending plan to date for our federal CARES Act allocation. The Federal CARES Act was quite an ambitious program adopted by Congress earlier this year. The city council approved a spending plan for that, and because it's such a unique program, we thought it would be appropriate tonight to give you just a very quick update on how our activities are going to date, making sure those dollars get out into the community with the intended use as approved by City Council. As I mentioned, the CARES Act was adopted by Congress back in March of this year. That was a $2.2 trillion stimulus plan, which provided specifically $150 billion to state, local, and tribal governments who are trying to navigate these unforeseen costs and circumstances associated with the COVID-19 outbreak. The amounts that were allocated to those different governmental jurisdictions were based on population. For cities, in order to qualify for this funding, you had to have a population at or above 500,000. There are no cities in Jackson County, including Kansas City, that meet that 500,000 population threshold. So our county government became the repository for those funds and became responsible then for allocating those for the intended uses. The dollars are highly restricted in how they can be spent. Number one, these dollars have to be utilized for expenditures. This can't be used as a revenue replacement, so they have to be directly tied to COVID-19 and an expense that you incurred because of COVID-19. These have to be dollars that were unaccounted for in your most recently adopted budget, meaning these weren't appropriated previously, so you couldn't supplant those dollars. It had to be unaccounted for. And finally, these costs have to fall between March 1 and December 30 of this year, 2020. Specifically for Independence, after a lot of back and forth, the county settled on a plan in which they would allocate $36.9 million to the municipalities within Jackson County. They did decide that they were going to allocate that specifically to cities that had a population over 5,000. For Independence, our percent of the population on a pro rata basis is 17.4%. 17.4% of the $40 million put us in line for $6.9 million. Previously, the county had asked us to go in and identify all of our costs, both incurred to date and then forecasted out through the end of the year related to COVID-19. And working with our city staff, we identified those costs to be about $22 million. So $6.9 million was certainly welcomed, but it was a fraction of the overall cost that we identified. The spending plan, to get those dollars into our community, we had to identify a pretty much down to the dollar plan of how we were going to spend these funds. That plan was approved by this body back on August 3rd, and about 2 weeks later, those funds were wired to us from the county. And again, how we came up with that plan was starting with that $22 million that we knew we needed. With our 6.9, we did a pro rata allocation across the different spending categories. So this is where we ended. That first column, original request, shows you the $22 million of need that I've mentioned to you. That middle column funded amount is the $6.9 million that we've received, and that shows, again, on the pro rata basis, how we allocated those dollars as approved by the council. And then that right-hand column shows the need that we have above and beyond this. And I point this out to you because you're going to see a few instances tonight where we have already gone beyond the funded amount, and that's why we've worked closely with our federal delegation in Congress to try to implore for more funds to be allocated. That's why we still stay vigilant with the county to try to see if there's going to be excess funds made available because we certainly have need of them. So let's talk about a couple of the specific categories and where we stand to date with those. Public testing expenses, we allocated $926,000. We put a request for qualifications out on the street back on September 4th. That stays open for a few more weeks through October 5th. What we're looking there is a qualified firm that can provide us testing kits on an as-needed, if-needed basis. Testing, if you listen to public health experts, is seen as one of the key ways to get out of this mire. We start testing more people. We find out who's sick. The people are sick. You quarantine. That's the way that most public health experts see us getting out of this. I can tell you the data I saw today, regionally, our public health experts say we need to be testing about 4,000 people per week. This region did about 2,200 tests last week, so you can see how woefully behind we are. That's why we've proposed getting testing going here in Independence using our own direct allocation. This amount, estimating about a cost of $125 per test, would give us about 2 months worth of testing if we try to hit 1,000 people per month. And that is through our public health advisors, including Christina Heinen, who's here tonight. That is the target amount that we need to be doing here in Independence on a monthly basis to meet those target guidelines. Public health expenses, this is really what you've, probably another term you've heard, PPE, or personal protective equipment. We allocated $385,000 here. Through today, we have expended $48,000. Now, these are the costs that the finance department has processed the checks for. Clearly, there are more costs that, through a purchase order or have been incurred, but as of to date, this is what checks have been cut for. We also have to wait for items to come back into stock, and in many cases, vendors will only allocate a certain amount to you. So we know that this is an amount that we will easily hit. We have fortunately been able to augment this with supplies from the State Emergency Management Association, as well as some very generous donations from members in our community. Disinfection of public areas, this is the sanitization and cleaning of our city facilities, allocated $16,000, and as of to date have spent about $8,300. And again, these are mostly the costs that have been processed as of June 30th, the end of the last fiscal year. Our public health expenses, specifically for technical assistance. These are the costs related to supporting technology and equipment to enhance both our cybersecurity and our telecommuting capabilities. So part of our public health management strategy has been having the opportunity for our employees who are able to do so to work remotely. But when you have employees working remotely and logging in, that obviously opens up opportunities and vulnerabilities. This council has made cybersecurity a very clear priority. So as of to date, we have $3.4 million under contract. Our CARES Act allocation portion of that, though, was only $1.3 million. So this is, again, an opportunity where additional funds could be spent to help supplement our COVID-19 expenses. Quarantining individuals, these are folks who have in one way, shape, or form either become symptomatic or asymptomatic or been around those who were. Quarantining costs, we allocated $413,000. Again, as of today, we've processed about $4,200 in expenses, but we know our estimates tell us that this remaining balance will be necessary in order to address the costs associated with that. Another eligible expense were public safety payroll expenses, the cost for police, fire, and EMT personnel to respond to this public health crisis, allocated $90,000, and as of today have expended $34,000. Again, those are the hours worked from our men and women of police and fire departments. Paying for sick and family medical leave, this has been a big cost, either people who, again, became symptomatic or asymptomatic or had family members who did and needed to take off to support them. These are the payroll expenses, the actual expenses. We allocated $1.2 million for this, and as of today have already expended $1.8 million. This is yet another example of where additional assistance would be necessary to help cover our costs that we've incurred to date. The social distancing precautions, these are the public health measures we put in place, those beautiful barriers between the members of our governing body up there, the decals on the floor, but also the largest expense here has been absorbing the credit card convenience fees. That was the measure that was done to encourage people to take advantage of online payment instead of coming in, which would have then incurred the $4.95 convenience fee. That has been waived since the onset of the pandemic. To date, we've expended $530,000 for this category. Again, another place we could use additional funds to plug that gap. And then the biggest expense allocated under this plan, and quite frankly, a leader among utilities, both public and private, was customer bill pay assistance. $2.3 million nearly was allocated by this council for this use. As of today, these funds are all under contract. We have executed an agreement with our longstanding partner, the Community Services League, to help us get these funds out the door to those most in need. That program went live back on September 3rd, and as of last Tuesday, when the city clerk said I had to have my presentation done, we had 385 applications already in just in the 5 days since we had this program live. I do want to spend a little bit of time here highlighting for you how these dollars are getting utilized in your community, because again, this is a major success story. Since the onset of the pandemic, back in March of this year, we had about 5,300 of our customers who had a delinquent bill. Delinquent bill is defined as being 30 days or more in arrears. That total value of those delinquent accounts was about $1.5 million. As of August now, that has increased to almost 6,900 customers, or 11% of your total customer accounts, and $1.9 million. Now, that is an increase of about $440,000. The good news here is that these delinquent accounts have decreased since a peak high in July. In speaking with our staff, many believe that that's because July was when the utility shutoffs resumed, so folks knew that they needed to begin to make some sort of payment arrangements. And one of the benefits that we put out there was allowing customers to have a 6-month repayment plan to get back into compliance. So that number has started to trickle down, but still $1.9 million, or 11% of your customer base, is obviously a significant amount. So Community Services League is now tracking those who are coming in and applying for assistance. And the data here is not specific to any one person, but these are just the general demographics of who is coming in, so you get a representation of what's going on in your community. The folks who are seeking assistance are mostly between the ages of 21 and 60, so this issue does not fall with any one age cohort. It does not discriminate. The oldest being 76 years of age that's applied for assistance. These are typically nearly families of 4, an average household size of 3.5. Their average monthly income is only about $1,800. That's household income, monthly household income, about $1,800. Again, this does not discriminate. We're seeing applications coming in from all zip codes, but there are higher concentrations up in the northwest part of the city in 64055, as well as right outside our door here in 64050. The average amount that's being stated as past due is about $686. Folks that are reporting this say that's about 39% of their total monthly income, just being dedicated to utility billing. Their average ability to pay that they state is about $160, which is leaving them a gap of about $530 per household per month. This shows you some of the reasonings of why people are stating that they've fallen on hard times. Again, this doesn't really discriminate. There's a lot of various reasons being given, whether it's that they had hours reduced, or their positions were eliminated, or they were furloughed. Some people are having to stay home to care for their children who are now engaged in virtual learning. And some folks, became ill and weren't able to work. So there's a variety of reasons out there. All the folks who've come in are stating that they would like to be working, they'd like to be in a position to be self-sufficient, but this pandemic has fundamentally changed their financial position. So back at a high level, one of the things, again, because this is a unique funding source and very high profile, we want the community to be able to see how these dollars are being utilized. So our Public Information Officer, Meg Lewis, is working with our city GIS team to develop a public-facing dashboard where folks could log in and see the different categories and metrics, where the status of these different categories, how are the dollars being utilized. So on utility assistance, for example, that would maybe tell folks not only how much has been spent, but how many customers have been assisted thus far. Testing, this would allow us to finally start reporting into the community specifically for independents. How many people are we testing? How many tested positive, et cetera, so folks can have a better sense of what's happening within their own city. So this dashboard is being worked on, and we assume here within the next 2 to 3 weeks, certainly by the 1st of October, that we'll have this live for the public to utilize and engage with. This presentation has specifically been focused on the CARES Act dollars that we received, the $6.9 million, but I do want the council and the community just to be aware that we have been the recipient of other dollars. Our city staff have been very aggressive in trying to pursue these opportunities where they exist. The police department was awarded $133 in grant assistance from the Bureau of Justice Assistance, which helps fund, the public safety resources associated with this pandemic response. CDBG, CV, these are the special allocation dollars from our CDBG fund, supplemental to the annual allocation that we get. Received $479,000 approximately for that. The Kansas City Area Transportation Authority, as the council will recall, awarded us $1.6 million to support public transit, which allowed us to help sustain our transit service this year without any further reductions to that. And then as the council approved earlier this evening, the Show Me State Recovery Plan, the $1.55 million for direct marketing, outreach, and promotion of our tourism sites here in Independence. So bringing it all home, this just gives you a quick feel. Expended to date, about $2.4 million related to the COVID response. We have another $5.8 million under contract. Again, the largest amounts being associated with our technology investment and with our utility assistance program. That leaves us a balance from our $6.9 million. But again, we believe those dollars will be quickly and efficiently spent. And I do want to point out, again, for the council and for the community's sake, already we are $3 million beyond what our allocation was of where if additional assistance became available, we could point to dollars already expended to date related to the COVID-19 response and would be well justified to do so. So with that, that's a quick update on where we're at with our CARES Act dollars, and happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions? Okay, thank you. Next is our What Works Cities update. You gonna do that one too?
You bet.
All right.
Again, Zach Walker, City Manager. I'm giving this update tonight on our What Works Cities program. I'm going to clip through this fairly quickly. I did have several slides. When I first prepared this presentation, this was the only item on the agenda. It got a little company tonight, so I'll work through this quickly, but we do post these online. If anybody would like to reach out to me with additional questions, I would hope that they would feel comfortable doing so. The reason I'm giving this presentation tonight, we have a position in my office that's the Strategic Resource and Performance Manager. That position is responsible for not only helping develop our annual budget every year, but then also ensuring that our budget has performance metrics associated with it and tracking performance relative to budget. That position recently became vacant when Kristen Ayers took an assistant city manager position in a neighboring municipality. So that position is vacant right now. So I'll give this update tonight, but I just wanted to point out that this is a responsibility of one of the positions that's in your table of organization. So the reason I wanted to talk to you about this is the council has made it very clear that continuing to promote accountability, transparency, and making data-driven decisions is a priority, and rightfully so. One of the phenomenal tools that we have at our disposal, and quite frankly, as you're going to see unique among cities across the country, is our participation in an organization known as the What Works Cities Initiative. This was a program that was launched by the Bloomberg Philanthropies back in April of 2015. It's one of the largest ever philanthropic efforts to enhance the city's use of data and evidence. And really what it tries to do is help governments improve local residents' lives by using evidence, by using data to say what are the problems out there and what are the most effective ways to tackle and address these instead of going off of instinct or gut or tradition or norm, using data and using evidence to drive our decision making each and every day. Who is eligible for participation? Well, this is open to any city with a population of 30,000 or more, but in order to make this effective, to not necessarily get overwhelmed, the Bloomberg group has limited this to 100 cities in 39 states. Looked just today, there are 19,502 incorporated places within the United States. So we are one of 100 out of 19,000 that are fortunate enough to participate in this program. The cities that participate in this, again, must have a minimum population of 30,000, but cities such as Los Angeles, Austin, Texas, places across the coasts and in the Midwest, all up and down the board are involved within this. By being involved in this, though, we are eligible for a wide range of support at no cost to us. There are a great number of institutions, as you're going to see, that lend technical assistance to cities to help them drive this data decision making, drive performance management, and ultimately drive better local government policy making and decisions. As I mentioned, there's a great number of partners who are involved with this, and This is just a quick representation. Each of these groups plays a unique role within the overall What Works Cities initiative. Each of them has a key responsibility, but all of them bring something unique to the table. Our participation, our journey with What Works Cities started back in December of 2015. We were one of the first 21 cities involved with this program. The initial announcement included a cohort of 8 people, 8 cities. The second announcement included a cohort of 13, and we were in that second round of participants selected for the program. So we have been involved for nearly 5 years now, and really pretty close to the inception of the program itself. We were selected for 2 opportunities with this group. One of those, as you're going to see, was to enhance our open data practices, and the other was to develop a more robust performance measurement program. So if you flash back some 5 years ago now, this was a time when the city was really ripe for such an opportunity. The council at that time was ready to start using data more, moving away from tradition, moving away from norms, moving away from this is the way we've always done it. In fact, the council embedded this in the last strategic plan, Independence for All, the last iteration of that, specifically stating that they wanted to make data-driven decision-making one of the key strategic goals. Our investment in CityWorks, which was allowing us to collect more data than we ever had before, was also a key part of this. And then we had, two things there that were going on. We built an open data portal. It was pretty raw at that time, but it was there. But again, we had that public commitment from the mayor, from the council, of saying, let's start becoming a little bit more advanced in how we use data to set policy and to set decision making. We also at that time, in my role previously as management analyst, had developed a performance dashboard that we called Insight Independence. It was pretty basic in those days, but it had 25 measures where we would set a target of how well we wanted to do in any given performance area, and then we would track our outcome relative to that and report publicly to the council how we were doing that. That really laid the groundwork for performance measurement in Independence. So What Works City saw those 2 things we were doing. Basic though it was, they said, you are demonstrating an ability and an interest to do this. We want to come in and help you learn to run with this faster than you'd probably be able to do so on your own. And that's why we were really selected for this program. So again, high level, this program has really transformed the way we do business. The council drafted and passed an open data policy. You'll see in a minute some of the results of that policy. We were able to take some of our historical performance measurement dashboard with the participation of the What Works Cities team and add that in too. So not just having what we've done in the last year or 2 fiscal years, but really going back several years so we could begin to do some trend analysis on our performance. They supported our departments in learning how to use this historical data to make better recommendations to the governing body, and then really began to tell these departments, here's how you engage with and participate in performance measurement. Helped us develop better performance measures. I tell you, the ones we had they were good for us, but I don't know that we were challenging ourselves at the level we could, and they gave us the courage and, quite frankly, the direction to become more aggressive with the targets we were setting, which raised the bar for us, and really just helped us commit overall that we'd be more transparent, more accountable, and presenting this information to be more data driven. Open Independence is the performance measurement dashboard, or pardon me, the open data dashboard that we use. Once every few months, our technology services team will upload open data into this website. Some really cool things have occurred with this. By uploading something as basic as restaurant inspections, an app developer out there was able to develop an app where you could pull up, a restaurant and see, is this a place I really want to eat with my family? Another app developer out there was able to take code enforcement data and begin to create heat maps of where are we seeing the most frequent code enforcement cases, which allowed us to use our scarce resources to try to do more proactive code enforcement in the neighborhood. So those are a couple examples of how the community grabbed onto these open data sets and created tools that otherwise we weren't using as a community or staff. This is our performance measurement dashboard. We report on this quarterly to the council. It's on our city website. We track our 4 customer goals. You can drill down in each of these, and there's performance measures associated with each of those that then track either a goal being met, being under goal, or goal not met. Lest Tom Scannell, if he's still here, have a heart attack, the growth category tonight is showing goal not met because we've not uploaded our last quarter of data yet, so that's why that's showing, but that shows you these are influenced by performance with each of the key measures in the goal categories. So wrapping up tonight, future opportunities. How could we use this tool now that we've kind of cleared that hurdle? What Works Cities, for those 100 cities that are involved, has created what's known as the What Works certification. They would describe that as a national standard of excellence for well-managed, data-driven government. But what that does is that really forces you to advance to the next level of how frequently are you reporting, what kind of data are you reporting, how well are you using data to drive decision-making in your community, in your organization. These are very aggressive and high standards. To date, very few cities, as you, let me advance here, cities of our size, they're in the gold category. 27 of those cities have applied. Of those 27 that fall within our population cohort, only 7 of those have thus far received certification. So that just, and the scores range from 0 to 100% of the different categories they evaluate you on. Average scores for communities in our geographic region is 19% independence score. When we applied last year was 11%, so that shows you the growth opportunities that we have. But this is a very worthy and ambitious goal for us. So that was a very quick assessment of our What Works Cities participation. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. City Manager. Are there any questions or comments on the What Works Cities initiative?
Very, very quickly, I just wanted to thank you, Mr. Walker. I think that aside from all the issues we may have and all the messes we have to clean up, that taking on sort of an extra project to really improve the city at a higher level and also at a foundational level is really great for the future of this city. So I just want to say thank you for doing that.
Thank you, and I do appreciate the council's utilization of that. I think all of us in this community are benefiting as a result.
Okay, thank you. Okay, finally this evening, Madam City Clerk, Boards and Commissions report. Independent Square Advisory Board recommendations have been made to reappoint Matt Medley and Sean Fite and appoint Trevor Tilton to this board. Is there any objection to bringing this forward to the council at the next on the next regular meeting agenda? Okay. Street Improvements Oversight Committee. Recommendations been made to reappoint Joshua Mayfield and as the individual appointment for Councilman Bryce Stewart. So this will be brought forward to the next regular meeting. Parks Commission, Councilmember DeLucy has recommended Ira Anders. This will be brought forward to the next regular meeting. These are individual appointments, so they don't need the council's consent to move them forward, in case you were wondering. The Council Interview Committee is recommending appointing Roy Brown to the Board of Adjustments. So that will be on the next agenda. The Council Review Committee is also recommending reappointing Martin Cooney to the Tax Increment Finance Commission and appointing Daniel Martin. So those will be coming forward to the next council meeting. The Council Review Committee is recommending appointment of Martin Dennis Tharp to the Heritage Commission, and that will come forward by recommendation of the committee. Diversity and Inclusion Task Force, I had asked the city clerk to put this on our agenda for this evening. There is no action that needs to be taken on this by the council at this juncture. As you recall, we did provide them with authority to go forward and issue an RFP for a community listening session that they wish to conduct in relationship to our diversity and inclusion initiatives in conjunction with our existing Human Relations Commission. And that is in the process, and we will be getting that back soon. The reason I wanted to bring this forward is this was a task force that was created in October for the specific purpose of reviewing a memorandum of understanding that had been in existence between the community of concerned citizens and the City of Independence, specifically the Independence Police Department, for a number of decades and really needed to be reviewed. So I quickly put together this task force for that specific purpose. This task force has demonstrated an interest and desire to continue on a more permanent basis or potentially combine with the Human Relations Commission. But if it were to continue as an independent task force, it wouldn't be a task force at that point, it would be a board or commission that requires action by the council to create that by ordinance and also to develop the parameters of what that board or commission would look like. So I just wanted to bring that to the council's attention that it's certainly not the intention for this group just to continue indefinitely as a task force. At some point in time, we need to make a determination if we want to make this a permanent group or somehow blend them in with an existing group. So we will let them complete their RFQ process that they are going forward with. That will come to the council for approval to grant them the funding to go ahead with that process or select the facilitator for that. But I just wanted to update the council on that. So that's all. Yes, Councilman.
Mayor, I was wondering if I could have a couple appointees added to that list. Parks Commission, April Schuler, and Street Improvement, Danny Martin.
Okay. Is there any objection to making those appointments? So it's Parks, I'm sorry, tell me again. Parks Commission, April Schuler, and Street Improvements, Daniel Martin. Is there any objection? Okay, you can add those. Madam City Clerk. Mr. City Manager, anything else?
Nothing tonight.
We're adjourned.